In this talk, we're going to compare the English and Spanish syntaxes. We're going to discuss the most common types of clauses, and we're going to identify key differences in the word order. So we're going to start with canonical clauses, which usually consist of a subject, which is usually a noun phrase, and a predicate, which is a VP. We're going to start with the relationship between verb paradigms and the subject. So in English, we have the primary forms and the secondary forms. And the primary forms, they can be used to represent either the present or the preterite tense. For present tense, we can choose between plain present or third person singular, so that the verb agrees with the subject. That's the only time when there's subject-verb agreement in English. And secondary forms can't really be used by themselves. Well, what they're used for is in combination with auxiliaries to represent other aspects and moods. Spanish, on the other hand, has a specific verb form for every tense, mood, and aspect, and for every type of subject. For example, this is the paradigm for the verb cantar. And so what does that mean for the subject? So if in a Spanish canonical clause the subject does not appear explicitly, we can still recover some information from that missing subject. So in this example, we have cantaremos en el festival with the period missing, and so we don't have a subject. We just have a verb phrase that forms the predicate. So if we take a closer look at the verb, each one of its morphemes is going to tell us something that maybe it's not necessarily there. For example, the a morpheme is the thematic vowel of the verb. The re morpheme, it means that the verb is in future tense and in indicative mood. And finally, the mos morpheme tells us that the subject is first person plural. So even though it's not there, we know that we could replace it with the pronoun nosotros. So if we try to bring that back into English, so if we try to translate this sentence into English, first thing that we run into is that there's no primary tense for English verbs to represent the future. So what English does is it uses the auxiliary will and the main verb in its plain form to express an epistemic mood, which means that it talks about something that is likely to happen in the future, given what the speaker knows at the moment when he says this sentence. So the sentence will translate to, we will sing at the festival. The other thing that we'll encounter is that if we try to omit the subject like we did in Spanish, where English is going to consider that an ungrammatical sentence. We can't say, we'll sing at the festival. So next thing we're going to talk about is transitive verbs, which are verbs that have either a direct or an indirect object as their complement. A direct object is usually a noun phrase, and it can be replaced by a pronoun in the accusative case. For example, we have Juliet read her book. We have the subject Juliet, the verb which is read, and her book, which is the direct object. So the direct object, her book, can be replaced by it, and it's going to replace it right there. So in Spanish, we can do the same thing. We can replace the direct object with a pronoun in the accusative case, but the word order is going to be different. So if we have that same sentence in Spanish, Julieta leyó su libro, we have su libro is the direct object, and it can be replaced with lo, but it's going to appear before the verb. In certain verb phrases in Spanish, the pronoun that replaces the direct object can go either before or after the verb. So in this example, voy a vender mi casa. Voy a vender is the verb phrase. Mi casa is going to be the direct object, and it will be so the direct object will be replaced or can be replaced with la, but it can go after the verb or before. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is psychological verbs. So these are verbs like, love, delights, frightens, and bores. So they're verbs that express a mental state. They have two things associated with them. They have the experiencer, who is the person who is experiencing that mental state, and the theme, which is what causes that mental state. So we have these two examples. Hate and anger they're psychological verbs. In both cases, Marie is the experiencer because she's the one experiencing hate or anger. In the first sentence, the experiencer is the subject. In the second sentence, the experiencer is the direct object. And the theme, in both cases, it's politics, but in the first sentence, it has the grammatical function of direct object, and in the second one as subject. In Spanish, it's different because the theme is always going to be the subject and the experiencing is always going to be the object. So we have these three sentences with gusta as its psychological verb. All three of them mean the same thing, right? That my brother likes his coffee. So in all three cases, the subject or the theme is el café, and the object or the experiencing is mi hermana. So what's going on is in the first sentence, has a subject, verb, object, word order. The second one, it has a verb, subject, object order. And in the third one, it has an object, verb, subject, word order. Alrighty, so next type of clause that we're going to look into are interrogative clause. So there are two types. There's closed and open interrogatives. Open interrogatives are usually more interesting because they're more complicated. But in this case, since we're comparing Spanish and English, there's more interesting comparisons to be made in closed interrogatives or yes or no questions. So closed interrogatives, to make a closed interrogative from a canonical declarative clause, we do these three steps, which I'm just gonna go ahead and do an example. So we have Mary opened a restaurant. The verb is opened. It is in preterite tense. So since it doesn't have an auxiliary, we're going to add a dummy auxiliary do in the preterite tense, which is did, and then we're going to switch the main verb opened to its plain form, which would be open. So the first step is we'll change the sentence into Mary did open a restaurant. And next we're going to do the subject auxiliary inversion. So it's exactly how it sounds. And then we're going to add a question mark, and now we have a close interrogative from that declarative clause. In Spanish, on the other hand, we just need to, if it's in speech, we just need to change the intonation. If we're writing it, we just need to add question marks. So, same translation from the previous example. If we have María abrió un restaurante, we can ask María abrió un restaurante? Right. Next type of clause are existential clauses, which they're used just to say that something exists. That something is usually the object of the clause. So there's no necessary subject. So what English does is it adds a dummy subject, the dummy subject there. So if we want to say that sweets exist in the kitchen, we would say there are sweets in the kitchen, and we have a dummy subject there, just fulfilling the grammatical function of subject, or there is a new bike in our driveway. In Spanish, like we saw, Spanish allows a null subject, so we don't need to have a subject. So we can if we translate the examples in these examples, we can just say hay golosinas en la cocina, or hay una nueva bicicleta en nuestra entrada. And last are subjects with impersonal verbs. So these are verbs that can't take any person as its subject. So these include verbs that have to do with meteorology or climate or temperature. So it just can't have any person as a subject. So what English does, to fulfill that subject function, it uses again a dummy subject. In this case, for impersonal verbs, it uses it. So we have, for example, it is raining. In Spanish, again, we take advantage that it's a null subject language, so we can just say está lloviendo. No need to add an unnecessary subject. And so that's for meteorological verbs, which is one type of impersonal verbs. Temperature-related verbs, in English, it's the same thing. The subject is the dummy it, so we can say it is hot to express temperature. In Spanish, temperature-related verbs are we usually use the verb hacer to refer to temperature. So we could say hace calor, which would be something similar to hot is being made, I guess. So that is it, and thank you for watching.